Vandag gesels ek met professor Pieter le Roux en hy's 'n professor verbonde aan die Universiteit van Pretoria se departement vir plante en grondwetenskap. Ek en hy gesels 'n bietjie oor die konsep van droë toestande wat planteienskap-diversiteit stimuleer. Professor, welcome to Grootplaas.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
It's a massive pleasure. It's a very interesting topic. Dry, arid conditions stimulate plant trait diversity. What do we mean by this?
Right, so maybe the first thing to say is we of course know that South Africa is a dry country. We're always being told to conserve our water.
Yeah.
But at a global scale, more than 90% of South Africa is actually considered to be a dry land, you know, and I don't think we always grasp that. So that makes this kind of question really relevant to us.
Absolutely.
And then the kind of concept here is that we think as we go from wetter areas to drier areas, we're going to see fewer types of plants, and indeed we do. But with that goes the idea that we expect those plants to have fewer and fewer strategies. We assume that there are only a few ways that they can cope with really dry conditions. And that's kind of what was investigated in this part of a bigger project.
Yes.
And what was really surprising was that we saw as you go from arid to, from semi-arid to arid, suddenly at that threshold, plants get more diverse in terms of how they're coping with drought. They're showing more strategies for dealing with the low rainfall.
Yeah. I was wondering, when it comes to a large-scale study like this, obviously you guys focused on dryland plants and ecosystems. Why did you feel there was a need for a study, especially now?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think the first point is that our drylands, even though they're not very productive always, even though there's not a lot of plants growing there, these drylands support huge numbers of people. It's estimated that up to 2 billion people live and rely on drylands. And of course, especially within the South African context, we've got so much farming that happens on these drylands.
Yes.
People who are commercially farming cattle and sheep. We've got subsistence farmers. We've even got commercial game farms in these arid areas. So understanding how these how these livelihoods affect the health and the productivity of these ecosystems. And then on top of that, we put the layer of climate change, understanding that so many of our drylands are getting drier, some of them are getting hotter also. So understanding what determines the health of these ecosystems is really important.
And I'm sure that when you conducted or entered this study, you had quite a few expectations. Tell me about some of the key and most interesting results you guys found, and did you expect it?
Okay, so yeah, let's talk first about this trait diversity study, which has just been published. So that one, indeed, we did not expect to see plants having more diverse strategies, more diverse chemical compositions as we went to drier areas. We really thought, look, there's only a few ways to survive really dry conditions, and that's what we're going to see. Instead, though, we see that in these really dry conditions, and we're talking now the really dry conditions, we're seeing plants showing all these different ways of coping. So that's really interesting, and that's kind of encouraging because it shows us that there is this wealth of adaptations in our plants. And it kind of says, well, we don't want rainfall to get any lower in our drylands, but plants do have an ability to tolerate some of that. And then if we think of kind of some of the other work that we've done from this big project, there was work, for example, looking at how the ecosystem services change. Okay, so that's all of the benefits that we as people get from healthy functioning ecosystems. Yes. That's everything from like water storage or erosion reduction. And what was really interesting is that we could see in different types of drylands, as we increase grazing, we get different responses. So in cool drylands with lots of different types of plants, as we increase grazing, we actually see our ecosystem services increase. So that's only a small subset of the global drylands. But in those types of drylands, we can actually say to, farmers, landowners, put more animals on your land because you can actually get more benefits from the land. Unfortunately, within the South African context of our drylands also being hot, that doesn't count for us.
Yes.
But what is relevant to South Africa is we saw that as the diversity of your grazers increased, we actually found more benefits from grazing. So, and this is kind of something that I'm sure many farmers are already aware of, but the idea that don't just have cattle, add some sheep or have kudu, have giraffe on your farm as well, and that actually increases the health of your farm.
Yes. I love that it's got, that obviously it's got an agricultural focus because, as you say, I actually want to ask you, what do you think the biggest impact is when it comes to South African agriculture? What would this mean for our farmers?
Okay, so unfortunately, I'm going to give you a careful answer here.
You are welcome.
I'm going to say what this encourages us to do is to invest more energy in understanding this within the South African context. This work has been done across 27 different countries. So what we're doing is we're looking at a global pattern. And maybe that global pattern holds in South Africa, and we can apply these findings exactly. But what I would say is that, we are such a unique country. For example, the fynbos is nowhere else in the world.
Yes.
The succulent karoo, the West Coast, nothing like that exists anywhere else in the world. The karoo is unique, the Kalahari is unique, the Bosveld is unique. But I think it encourages us to take these findings and say, do they work in the South African context only also?
Yes.
And points to the importance of, experimenting and saying, well, what happens when we increase the amount of livestock or when we diversify our livestock? So I think it talks to saying, look, we have got the potential to manage our livestock in a way that maximizes the health and the benefits of our ecosystems. And that's worth us exploring because at a global pattern, at a global scale, we can see how strong those effects can be. And we need to now put some effort into understanding it in our specific context.
And that's why I'm always so excited that there's clever people like you that explore, and it's actually really amazing. And I'm wondering, how do you envision that the findings from this research, how do you think it's going to influence conservation efforts and policies specifically in South Africa?
Right. So I think we can kind of follow on from what we were saying of the importance of managing our grazing well, understanding what combinations of animals are going to give us the greatest benefit from our veld. And then I think the most important thing is probably making sure that we support farmers to be able to do that with their land, that we put policies in place that make it easier to get the right herbivores, and really just kind of make that a practical solution, remove the red tape that might inhibit some of those things.
Yes. Yeah, that's very important. This study also involved 120 scientists from 27 countries. Why is it important for South Africa to be included in studies like this? I know it's a big question, but I'm also looking forward to a big answer because it's quite amazing to be part of this, right?
Yes, it's really was a fantastic opportunity to take part in it.
Yeah,
I think it's really important that the world understands more about how unique South Africa is in terms of its nature, in terms of its vegetation, its plants, its animals. Because I think, it's easy to just say, well, you're some country far away at the tip of Africa. But we've got opportunities to study things that are harder or even impossible to study anywhere else. We can think, if we go on a different track for a second, we can think of the Square Kilometre Array telescope.
Yes.
In the Karoo. You know, the South African environment presented the perfect opportunity for establishing this. You can think of South Africa's subantarctic islands and our Antarctic research station. Very few other countries have facilities like that or have facilities in places like that. So we've got these amazing opportunities. Our government talks about them in terms of geographic advantages. And we do have these advantages of living in a diverse country with a huge biodiversity. So I think it's important for the rest of the world to understand that, to realize it, and to see the opportunities to working with us. And of course, we also benefit because there's skills that other countries that are more abundant in other countries that, you know, we can learn from.
Yes.
So this kind of international cooperation and collaboration, I think, has got benefits for us and for people from other countries.
And I'm also just wondering, practically, how was a study like this? How was it conducted practically? How did you guys do it?
So, I mean, I think we should take a step back and say, okay, back in, I think, 2014 or so,
yes,
a colleague from Spain approached me and approached a number of other people and said, listen, we're interested in doing this global scale study. We think it's going to give some really interesting results. Would you like to be part? And they said, look, they will cover some of the costs of analyzing samples in the labs back in Spain. And then it was up to the individual participants to find funding, to find research sites, and to go and collect this data.
Yeah.
And I was in a fortunate position to have a master's student, Michelle Lowe, who just finished her work, and she'd been working in the Karoo. And we knew of 2 sites that would work well here, where we would be able to get access to areas with high grazing and low grazing, and areas protected from grazing. And she then took, I think, about 4 or 5 weeks, and she went and she collected this data. It was a lot of identifying the plants, collecting soil samples, weighing the leaves, measuring the area of the leaves, all of those kinds of things that have to be done in the field.
Yes.
And then we packaged up those samples and we sent them off to Spain, and then they processed, for example, the elements in the leaves. They've done the soil analyses. There's someone working on the microbial communities in the soil even. So yeah, a lot of hard work in the field here by a very talented student, and then a lot of hard work in the labs by technicians who know exactly what they're doing. And then you end up with this amazing data set, you know, and we're going to be doing a lot more analyses in the data set. From our side, from this whole global project, we are leading the analysis of understanding when plants benefit from growing within neighbours and when actually they benefit from growing far away.
Yes.
So there's lots more questions that we're still going to be answering from this.
I look forward to hearing the answers to those questions. Professor, in Afrikaans we say dis omtrent 'n mond vol, but I'm so glad that people like you are doing this work. Thank you for the research and for sharing it with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.